Dr. Adrian Hare. I'm Head of Department and Senior Lecturer at Help University in Kuala Lumpur. I've been in Malaysia for a really long time. I've been here about 30 years. I've worked in private universities, but most of my time has been spent in public universities. What I want to say is something about the history of education in Malaysia over the last 50 years. I haven't been here for all that time, obviously, but I'll talk about the history of education, and I'll say something about how that has affected the teaching of English and English language proficiency. I think that it's pretty clear that the history of education in Malaysia is very much tied in with the establishment of the mission schools. If you look before the colonial period, there weren't that many schools. There is a record of a school having been set up by the Spanish in 15 something or other, but after that records seem to be very unclear. It's not there don't seem to be records about what the Dutch did when they were here, whether they had schools for Malayans, I suppose you would call them, or whether they just had a school for the children of the Dutch. That's not clear at all. What the Portuguese did, same kind of thing. It's not clear what was done. Most of the schools would have been what we might call pondok. They would have been in rural areas. But during the colonial period, I think we can say that we started to see the establishment of a national education system. I'm using that term lightly because the colonial government did not really have a policy about education as such. Most of the schools that were set up were not what you might call government schools. They weren't schools set up by the colonial government. They were mission schools. And it's interesting too that the focus, if you like, of the colonial government was mainly on the Straits settlements, that is Penang, Malacca and Singapore, not so much on the Malay states. The Malay states were seen by the colonial government as being under control of the local sultans, and therefore whatever went on in the states, the British, I won't say they didn't interfere, they did, but they certainly did not interfere or really have any policy with regards to the Malay states. So the initial schools would have been mission schools. I mean, it's Christian schools. They were set up in the bigger towns because obviously that's where Christians live. Although mission schools were open to everybody, you did not have to be a card-carrying Christian to go to be able to go to a mission school. Anybody could go. Didn't matter what your race was. Didn't matter what your religion was. If you wanted to go to school, everyone was they were quite happy to take you. Of course, like everything else, events in Malaysia were influenced by political events, by socio-cultural events. So although there was a situation in which you'd got the mission schools and you'd got government English medium schools, the fact was that people still felt that the mission schools were better, that they were delivering a better quality education than the government English medium schools. If you had a choice, you went to the mission schools, not to the government English schools, which were not very well funded and not very well staffed. But of course, after 1969, we can say that the policy with regard to language in Malaysia changed a great deal. The emphasis changed from being English medium schools to having an education system in Bahasa. And that's the situation that we see now, although there is a great growth in the provision of private education, international schools, and so on. I read somewhere that there are something like 60 international and private schools scattered across Malaysia. With regard to the national schools, there was the PPSMI initiative, in which it was proposed that science and mathematics should be taught in English, but that policy was reversed, and now everything is taught in Bahasa. However, there is the new Malaysian education blueprint, and how that is actually going to be implemented and how that is actually going to affect the provision of education in Malaysia and the provision of English language education in Malaysia needs to be seen. 突然的想